"Do you cry from hunger too?" asked the poor boy to the millionaire, but he was mourning the son who had passed away a year ago. The boy comforts the millionaire, and what the millionaire does will surprise you. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The November rain hammered against the cemetery gates as Richard Harrison stood motionless before the small white headstone. His expensive black coat was soaked through, but he didn't care. Nothing mattered anymore. 1 year. 365 days since Michael had been taken from him. Michael Harrison, beloved son, age 6. The words blurred through his tears, just like they had every day for the past year. His little boy, his everything, gone because of a drunk driver who walked away without a scratch. Richard's hands clenched into fists inside his coat pockets. The settlement money meant nothing. The fancy lawyers meant nothing. His multi-million-dollar empire meant nothing without Michael's laughter echoing through their mansion. "Daddy, why are you so sad?" Richard spun around, startled. A small boy with messy blonde hair and clothes that had seen better days stood behind him, clutching a plastic bag with what looked like empty cans inside. The child's blue eyes were too wise for his 7 years, and his thin frame spoke of meals missed more often than enjoyed. I lost someone very important to me," Richard managed, his voice hoarse from crying. The boy tilted his head, studying Richard's face with surprising intensity. Then he asked the question that would change both their lives forever. "Do you cry from hunger too?" Richard's breath caught in his throat. The innocence in those words, the assumption that tears came from the same source the child knew so well, hit him like a physical blow. Here was this small boy, clearly struggling for his next meal, yet showing concern for a complete stranger's pain. "No, son, I don't cry from hunger." "Then why do you cry?" Tommy asked, stepping closer despite the rain. "My mama used to say tears wash away the hurt, but mine never seemed to stop the hungry feeling in my tummy." Richard knelt down to the boy's level, rain mixing with tears on his cheeks. "What's your name?" "Tommy Miller. I stay in different places." The boy's voice carried a maturity that broke Richard's heart. "What's your name, mister?" "Richard. Richard Harrison." He paused, looking into those trusting blue eyes. "Tommy, where are your parents?" Tommy's small shoulders sagged. "Mama went to heaven 6 months ago. She got real sick. And Daddy, Daddy left when I was little, said he wasn't ready to be a daddy." The parallel hit Richard like lightning, both of them standing in the rain, both having lost everything that mattered. But where Richard had money and an empty mansion, Tommy had nothing but hope still flickering in his young eyes. "Are you going to be okay out here in the rain, Tommy?" The boy nodded with forced bravery. "I found a dry spot under the bridge. And look." He held up his bag of cans proudly. "I collected enough today to maybe buy a sandwich." Richard's heart shattered completely. Here was this child, showing him more strength and resilience than he'd managed in a year of grief. Without thinking, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a $100 bill. "Tommy, take this. Get yourself somewhere warm and—" "No, thank you, Mr. Richard." Tommy stepped back, shaking his head firmly. "Mama taught me not to take money from strangers, but—" He hesitated, then moved closer to Richard again. "Maybe you could come with me? You look like you need a friend too." And in that moment, as Richard looked into the face of this extraordinary little boy who had nothing yet offered everything, he made a decision that would change both their destinies. "Okay, Tommy, show me this dry spot of yours." But as they walked away together, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that Tommy Miller was hiding something important, something that would soon turn his world upside down in ways he never imagined possible. The makeshift shelter under Interstate 405 was surprisingly organized. Tommy had arranged cardboard boxes to create walls, and a tattered blue tarp stretched overhead kept the worst of the rain out. A small backpack in the corner held what appeared to be Tommy's entire world. A few changes of clothes, a worn stuffed elephant, and a notebook filled with careful drawings. "See? It's not so bad," Tommy said cheerfully, settling onto a folded blanket. "Sometimes Mr. Rodriguez from the taco truck brings me leftover food. He's real nice, and Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop gave me this blanket when it got cold last month." Richard couldn't speak. His son Michael had owned more toys than this child had possessions. The injustice of it made his chest tight with emotion. How had the system failed this bright, resourceful boy so completely? "Tommy, how long have you been living like this?" "Since Mama went to heaven. The social workers tried to find me, but I'm good at hiding." Tommy's voice carried a practiced casualness that broke Richard's heart. "They want to put me in a group home, but Mama made me promise to stay free until—" "Until what?" Tommy's eyes darted away, his small fingers picking at a loose thread on the blanket. "Nothing. Just until I figure things out. Mama always said I was smart enough to take care of myself." Richard noticed the boy's careful word choice, the way he avoided certain topics. There was clearly more to this story. "Tell me about your mother. What was she like?" Tommy's face lit up instantly, the wariness melting away. "Mama was the most beautiful person in the whole world. She had blonde hair like mine, and she could sing like an angel. She worked real hard at the diner downtown, sometimes double shifts, so we could afford our little apartment. She always said I was her miracle baby because—" He stopped abruptly, his mouth snapping shut. "Because what, Tommy?" "Because she thought she couldn't have kids. That's all." But Tommy's quick glance away, and the flush creeping up his neck, suggested there was much more to that story. As night fell and the temperature dropped, Richard made a decision that would change both their lives. "Tommy, I can't leave you here. It's not safe for a boy your age." "I've been fine for 6 months, Mr. Richard. I'm tougher than I look. I know which places to avoid and which people are safe. I know you are incredibly tough, but I have a big house with empty rooms and more food than I could ever eat. Would you consider staying with me? Just for a while, until we figure out a better solution?" Tommy studied Richard's face intently, as if trying to read his soul. "You really miss your little boy, don't you? I can see it in your eyes, the same hurt Mama had sometimes. Every single day. His name was Michael. He was 6 when he—" Richard's voice broke, the grief still as fresh as an open wound. Tommy scooted closer without hesitation and wrapped his small arms around Richard's trembling shoulders. "Mama used to say that love doesn't die, it just moves to a different place in your heart. Maybe your Michael sent me to find you when you needed a friend most." For the first time in a year, Richard felt something other than crushing grief pierce through the darkness. But as Tommy pulled back, Richard noticed something that made his blood run cold. A small, distinctive birthmark on Tommy's left wrist, shaped like a perfect crescent moon. The exact same birthmark his investigators had mentioned in the reports about his son's case. Richard's hands trembled uncontrollably as he drove Tommy through the imposing security gates of his Beverly Hills estate. The coincidence of the birthmark couldn't be ignored, but he forced himself to stay calm. There had to be a rational explanation. Birthmarks like that couldn't be that uncommon, could they? "Wow," Tommy breathed, pressing his face against the car window, his breath fogging the glass. "It's like a castle from one of Mama's fairy tale books. Do you really live here all by yourself?" Aye, the 40-room mansion did look imposing in the moonlight, its Mediterranean architecture sprawling across 3 manicured acres. But to Richard, it had been nothing but a beautiful mausoleum for the past year, filled with echoes of laughter that would never return. Now, seeing it through Tommy's wide eyes, he remembered why he'd built it, for the family he'd dreamed of having with Emma. "Mrs. Chen!" Richard called as they entered the marble foyer, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. His housekeeper appeared from the kitchen, her expression shifting from surprise to maternal concern as she took in Tommy's thin frame and second-hand clothes. "Mr. Harrison, is everything all right?" "Mrs. Chen, this is Tommy. He'll be staying with us for a while. Could you prepare the blue guest room and perhaps find some of Michael's clothes that might fit him?" Richard's voice caught slightly on his son's name. Mrs. Chen's eyes widened with understanding and something that might have been hope. She'd worked for the Harrison family for 15 years, had helped raise Michael from infancy, and understood grief better than most. "Of course, Mr. Harrison. Right away." As Tommy explored the main floor with childlike wonder, touching expensive vases and artwork with careful reverence, Richard stepped into his mahogany-paneled study and pulled out a thick file from his safe, the complete police report from Michael's accident. His hands shook as he found the page he was looking for, the one he'd read 1,000 times but never paid close attention to this particular detail. Witness described the other car's occupant as a blonde woman, approximately 28-30 years old, with a young child in the back seat, approximately 7 years old. Child appeared conscious but disoriented. Notable distinguishing mark, child had distinctive crescent-shaped birthmark on left wrist, clearly visible when paramedics examined him before transport to hospital. The file slipped from Richard's fingers, papers scattering across his Persian rug. The drunk driver who killed Michael hadn't been alone. There had been a child in the car, a child who matched Tommy's description perfectly, down to that impossible birthmark. "Mr. Richard." Tommy appeared in the doorway, now clean and wearing Michael's blue pajamas. The sight nearly dropped Richard to his knees. The child looked so much like Michael at that age, it was breathtaking. "I found this picture on the shelf in the hallway. Is this your Michael?" Richard's breath caught in his throat. Tommy was holding a framed photo from Michael's 6th birthday party, the last birthday they'd celebrated together. "Yes, that's him." Tommy studied the photo with intense concentration, his small brow furrowed. "He looks like he was really happy, and—" Tommy tilted his head, confusion and something else, recognition, crossing his features. "He looks kind of familiar, like maybe I've seen him before, but not in real life." Richard's heart hammered against his ribs so hard he thought it might burst. "Where might you have seen him, Tommy?" I don't know exactly. Sometimes I have these weird dreams about a boy who looks just like this. We're playing together in a big yard with lots of toys. But Mama always said dreams were just my imagination playing tricks on me." Tommy set the photo down with careful reverence. "Mr. Richard, can I ask you something important?" "Anything in the world." "The night before Mama died, she was really sick and scared. She made me promise something really, really important. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should find a man named Richard Harrison and tell him the truth about what happened that night. But she never told me what truth she meant, and I've been trying to figure it out ever since." The room spun around Richard as the pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Tommy's mother hadn't just been in the car that killed Michael. She'd been looking for him specifically. Sleep completely eluded Richard that night. He stood in his study until dawn, surrounded by police reports, private investigator files, and medical records, trying to make sense of the impossible puzzle that Tommy had revealed. The woman who'd been driving that night was named Sarah Miller, Tommy's mother. But the more he studied the reports, the more questions arose. The toxicology report showed no alcohol in Sarah's system. She hadn't been drunk driving as initially reported. The accident had been caused by a mechanical failure. Her brakes had failed as she turned into his driveway. She'd been coming to see him intentionally. At breakfast, Tommy ate with the desperate appetite of a child who'd known real hunger, but his intelligent blue eyes kept darting to Richard with growing curiosity and something that looked like concern. "Mr. Richard, you look really tired. Did I say something wrong last night about my mama's promise?" "No, Tommy, you didn't say anything wrong." I just had a lot on my mind. Richard set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. Can you tell me more about your mother? What did she do before she worked at the diner? Tommy's fork paused halfway to his mouth, and Richard caught a flicker of something, wariness, cross the boy's face. She used to work at a big hospital. Saint. Mary's downtown. She was really smart, knew lots of medical stuff, and could explain things the doctors said, but she got fired right before I was born. Do you know why she was fired? Tommy shook his head, but his expression suggested he might know more than he was saying. His eyes didn't meet Richard's when he spoke. She never talked about it much, just said that sometimes good people have to make really hard choices, and that not everyone would understand her choices. She seemed really sad about it, though. Richard's phone buzzed with an urgent text from his private investigator. Found something critical about Sarah Miller. Can't discuss over phone. Security risk. Meet me at the office ASAP. Bring the boy. He might not be safe. A chill ran down Richard's spine. Tommy, I have to run out for a little while to handle some important business. Would you like to come with me? Can I really come? I promise I'll be really good and won't touch anything. Richard hesitated. Every paternal instinct he'd developed over the past year told him to keep Tommy close, especially now. Of course you can come, but you'll need to wait in the car for a few minutes while I handle some grown-up business. An hour later, Richard sat across from Detective Jake Morrison in his downtown office, while Tommy waited in the car in the parking garage with a comic book and strict instructions to keep the doors locked. Richard, you need to prepare yourself for this. Jake slid a thick manila folder across the desk, his expression grave. Sarah Miller didn't just work at St. Mary's Hospital. She was a senior nurse in the maternity ward with access to all birth records and newborn care facilities. And according to these records I obtained, she was fired for allegedly attempting to steal confidential medical files. What kind of files? Birth records. Specifically, records related to babies born around the same time as her son Tommy, including detailed genetic information and family medical histories. Jake's expression grew darker. But here's where it gets really complicated. The hospital has no official record of Tommy Miller being born there, even though Sarah listed St. Mary's as his place of birth on every single legal document. Richard's blood ran cold as the implications hit him. What are you saying? I'm saying Tommy Miller might not be who you think he is. And based on the dates, the timing, Sarah's access to records, and the fact that she was specifically seeking you out. Jake paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. Richard, what if Tommy is actually Michael? What if your son didn't die in that accident? The room tilted dangerously on its axis as Richard processed the impossible possibility that had been growing in his mind since seeing that birthmark, since hearing Tommy's fragmented memories, since witnessing the uncanny resemblance to the son he'd lost. Richard's hands shook violently as he walked back to the car where Tommy waited, his mind reeling with Jake's revelation. The boy looked up from his comic book with such innocent trust and genuine affection that Richard felt physically ill. If Jake's theory was correct, it meant Sarah Miller had kidnapped Michael as an infant and raised him as her own son for 6 years. But it also meant the miracle he'd prayed for every night was real. His son was alive. Is everything okay, Mr. Richard? You look really pale, like you might be sick. I'm fine, Tommy. Just some very complicated business stuff that's hard to understand. Richard started the car, his mind racing through possibilities and implications. Tommy, I want to ask you about something important, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Can you do that? I always try to tell the truth. Mama taught me that lies hurt people, even when you don't mean them to. Do you remember anything at all from when you were very little? Maybe before you could walk or talk properly? Tommy frowned, concentrating hard, his small face scrunched up with effort. Mama always said I was too young to remember anything from before I was 3, but sometimes I have these really weird dreams that feel more real than regular dreams. There's a big man with dark hair and kind eyes who used to hold me and read me stories. And there's a lady with the prettiest voice who sang lullabies that made me feel safe. But Mama said it was just my imagination because I never had a daddy or any other family besides her. Richard's heart pounded so hard he could barely hear over the rushing in his ears. The description matched him and his late wife Emma perfectly. Emma had died when Michael was only 8 months old from an aggressive cancer, leaving Richard to raise their precious son alone for the first 5 years of his life. "Tommy, would you be willing to do something that might seem a little strange? Just to help me figure out some important things?" "Sure, I like helping. What kind of thing?" "A doctor needs to take a small sample of your blood. It won't hurt much, just a tiny pinch with a needle. It's to check if you're healthy and to understand some medical things." Tommy nodded eagerly, showing no fear. "Mama used to take me for blood tests sometimes at different hospitals. She always seemed really nervous about them, though, and she'd ask lots of questions about what they were testing for. She said she wanted to make sure I was growing right and that I was healthy." 2 hours later, at Richard's private physician's office, Dr. Patricia Wells drew the blood sample while Tommy chatted happily about the anatomical posters on the walls, asking surprisingly sophisticated questions about human biology that impressed the medical staff. "When will we know the results?" Richard asked quietly while Tommy was distracted. "I'll rush the DNA comparison against the samples you provided from Michael's medical records. Give me exactly 24 hours. That evening, as Tommy slept peacefully in Michael's room wearing Michael's pajamas and clutching Michael's favorite stuffed animal, Richard called Jake Morrison with shaking hands. "I need you to dig deeper into Sarah Miller's entire background. Find out everything, where she came from, her family history, any criminal record, psychological evaluations, employment history, everything. And Jake, find out exactly what happened the night of the accident. I need to know precisely why she was driving to my house." "Richard, if Tommy really is Michael, we're talking about felony kidnapping. Sarah Miller would have been looking at decades in prison. Maybe that's exactly why she was coming to tell me the truth. Maybe she couldn't live with the lie anymore." But as Richard hung up the phone and watched Tommy sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still much more to this story. Something that would explain why a woman would steal a baby, raise him lovingly for 6 years, and then try to return him right before dying in the very accident that was supposed to bring him home. The call came at 6:47 a.m., shattering the early morning silence. Richard had been awake all night, pacing his study like a caged animal, when Dr. Wells's voice cut through his anxiety like a knife. "Richard, you need to sit down for this. Are you somewhere private?" "Just tell me, Patricia, I can't wait another second. The DNA is a 99.7% match. Tommy Miller is unquestionably your biological son, Michael. There is absolutely no doubt." The phone slipped from Richard's hand, clattering onto his desk as 6 years of desperate searching and 1 year of devastating mourning crumbled into dust. His son was alive. Michael was alive, breathing, sleeping peacefully upstairs in his own bed, safe and whole. But the overwhelming joy was immediately overshadowed by a darker, more complex realization. Sarah Miller had stolen his child and allowed him to believe Michael was dead for an entire year. She had robbed him of watching his son grow, learn to read, lose his first tooth, start school. Richard climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a lifetime of lost moments. He pushed open the bedroom door and watched Tommy, Michael, sleep in a shaft of golden morning sunlight. Even knowing the truth, it seemed impossible. This street-smart, resilient, incredibly brave boy was his baby who'd been ripped away from him. Tommy's eyes fluttered open, immediately alert and focused. "Morning, Mr. Richard. You're up really early. Is everything okay?" "Tommy, we need to talk about something very important, something that's going to change everything." The boy sat up instantly, recognizing the gravity in Richard's voice. "Did I do something wrong? Are you sending me back to the streets?" "No, son. You could never do anything wrong, and I will never let you go back to living on the streets." Richard sat on the edge of the bed, his voice trembling with emotion. "Tommy, what I'm about to tell you is going to be very confusing and possibly upsetting, but I need you to listen carefully and know that everything I'm saying is true." "Okay, I'm listening." Richard took a deep breath. "Your name isn't Tommy Miller. Your real name is Michael Richard Harrison. You're my son, my biological son, who was taken from me when you were just a baby." Tommy's face went completely blank with shock, his blue eyes wide and uncomprehending. That's not possible. Mama was my mama. She loved me more than anything in the whole world. She would never lie to me about something like that." "She did love you, Michael. I'm absolutely certain of that. But she took you from me when you were just 8 months old. I thought you had died in that car accident, but you were alive the whole time, living just a few miles away from me." Tommy shook his head frantically, tears beginning to stream down his face. "No, you're wrong." "You have to be wrong. Mama wouldn't steal a baby. She was good and kind, and she sang to me when I had nightmares." Richard's heart shattered at the confusion and pain in those familiar blue eyes. Michael's eyes, Emma's eyes. "The blood test proves it, son. You have the same birthmark Michael had. You remember things from when you were a baby that only Michael would remember, and your mother was coming to return you to me the night she died. But why? Why would she do something like that if she loved me?" "I don't know yet, but I promise you I'm going to find out." Richard reached for Tommy's trembling hand. "Michael, I know this is overwhelming and terrifying, but you're safe now. You're home, where you belong." Tommy pulled away, sobbing harder. "I don't understand any of this. If I'm really your son, why don't I remember you at all? Why does it feel like Mama was telling me the truth my whole life?" Before Richard could answer, his phone rang. Jake Morrison's voice was urgent and breathless. "Richard, I found the missing pieces. Sarah Miller had a baby boy who died at birth 6 years ago, the exact same week Michael was born. Hospital records show she had a complete psychological breakdown and was hospitalized for severe depression and psychosis. And Richard, she used to work in the same hospital where your wife Emma was treated during her cancer battle. She knew about your family, knew about Emma's death, knew you were raising Michael alone." The pieces suddenly clicked into place with horrifying clarity. She replaced her dead son with mine. There's more. The night of the accident, she wasn't drunk or reckless. She was rushing to your house because she'd just been diagnosed with terminal cancer, stage 4, only weeks to live. She was bringing Michael home before she died because she couldn't bear the thought of him being alone. Richard looked at Tommy, who was listening to every word despite his tears, his face a mixture of confusion, anger, heartbreak, and something else, understanding. "So Mama really was dying, and she really was trying to bring me back to you," Tommy whispered. "She wasn't a bad person who wanted to hurt us. She was just broken inside and trying to fix things before it was too late." And in that moment, Richard realized that the truth about Sarah Miller would force them both to confront an impossible question. How do you forgive someone who stole your child but loved him as deeply as any mother could? How do you rebuild a relationship with a son who doesn't remember you but mourns the woman who raised him with genuine love? The answer would either destroy them both or create something stronger and more beautiful than either had ever imagined possible. 3 weeks had passed since the revelation, and Tommy, he still thought of himself as Tommy, was struggling to accept his new reality. The name Michael felt foreign on his tongue, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. He sat in the sprawling garden behind Richard's mansion, staring at a photo album filled with pictures of a baby he was supposed to be. "That's you at 8 months," Richard said gently, settling beside him on the marble bench. "You had just learned to clap your hands. You did it constantly, especially during meals." Tommy studied the photo, a chubby, happy baby with bright blue eyes, sitting in a high chair, hands frozen mid-clap, food smeared across his face. "I don't remember any of this. How can I not remember my own life? Memory is complicated, especially for young children. Dr. Patterson says it's completely normal for traumatic events to block early memories." Dr. Patricia Patterson, the child psychologist Richard had hired, had been visiting daily to help Tommy process the overwhelming truth. She explained that the mind could create protective barriers around painful experiences, essentially rewriting a child's understanding of their own history. "Sometimes I have these weird moments," Tommy admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Like yesterday when Mrs. Chen made pancakes. For just a second, I could almost taste something different, blueberry pancakes, I think, and there was this feeling of safety, like someone was singing to me." Richard's heart clenched. "Your mother Emma made blueberry pancakes every Sunday. She would sing 'You Are My Sunshine' while she cooked." "Emma was my real mom?" "Yes. She died when you were 8 months old. Cancer." Richard's voice caught. "She loved you more than life itself. Her last words were about you. She made me promise to always keep you safe." Tommy was quiet for a long moment, processing this information about a woman he couldn't remember, but who had given him life. What was Sarah to me then? Was she just a kidnapper? That's what I'm trying to understand. Jake found something interesting in Sarah's psychological records. After her baby died, she suffered what doctors called a dissociative break. She genuinely believed you were her son. In her mind, she wasn't stealing you, she was saving you. So she really did love me? "I think she did, Tommy. In her own broken way, she gave you everything she had." That evening, as Tommy looked through more photo albums, something unexpected happened. A picture of Emma holding baby Michael triggered a flash of memory, warm arms, a soft voice, the scent of vanilla perfume. For the first time since learning the truth, Tommy felt a connection to the life he'd lost, but with that connection came guilt. How could he miss a mother he'd never known while grieving the woman who'd stolen him away? "Mr. Richard," Tommy said as they said goodnight, "what if I never remember being Michael? What if I'm always just Tommy pretending to be your son?" Richard knelt to Tommy's eye level, his voice firm but gentle. "You don't have to be anyone but yourself. Michael or Tommy, you're my son. That's what matters." But as Richard tucked him in, Tommy wondered if loving Sarah Miller made him disloyal to his real family. The confusion was eating him alive. The knock on Richard's door came at precisely 9 a.m. on a Monday morning. 2 stern-faced women in dark suits stood on his doorstep, their badges identifying them as Child Protective Services investigators. "Mr. Harrison, I'm Agent Sarah Collins, and this is Agent Maria Rodriguez. We need to speak with you about the minor child currently in your care." Richard's blood ran cold. "Tommy, Michael, is my biological son. I have the DNA results." "Yes, we're aware of the paternity confirmation. However, the circumstances surrounding the child's placement in your home raise serious concerns. May we come in?" In Richard's study, the agents laid out their case with clinical precision. "Mr. Harrison, according to our investigation, the child known as Tommy Miller was legally adopted by Sarah Miller 6 years ago through private channels. The adoption was finalized and recognized by the state." "That's impossible. Sarah Miller kidnapped my son." Agent Collins opened a thick file. "These documents suggest otherwise. Sarah Miller filed adoption papers claiming the child was abandoned by drug-addicted parents who had died in an overdose. She provided falsified medical records and death certificates. The adoption appeared legitimate at the time. Richard felt the world spinning. But Tommy, Michael, was never abandoned. He was taken from his crib while I was at work. We understand your position, Mr. Harrison. However, legally speaking, Tommy Miller is Sarah Miller's adopted son. With her death, he should have entered the foster care system, not been placed with you, regardless of biological parentage. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. We're not here to punish anyone, but we need to ensure the child's well-being. There are procedures that must be followed. What are you saying exactly? Tommy will need to be placed in temporary foster care while we sort out the legal complexities. This could take months, possibly years. Absolutely not. Richard's voice turned steel hard. I will not lose my son again. Mr. Harrison, you don't have legal custody. The child doesn't even remember you as his father. At that moment, Tommy appeared in the doorway, having overheard the conversation. His face was pale with terror. Are you here to take me away? Agent Collins softened her tone. We're just here to make sure you're safe and properly cared for, Tommy. I am safe. Mr. Richard takes good care of me. Please don't make me go back to being alone. Richard moved protectively in front of Tommy. I'm calling my attorney. You're not taking him anywhere without a court order. After the agents left with promises to return with proper paperwork, Richard held Tommy as the boy shook with fear. I won't let them separate us, Richard promised, whatever it takes. But privately, Richard knew he was facing the fight of his life. Sarah Miller's well-intentioned deception had created a legal nightmare that could destroy their fragile new family. Jake Morrison arrived that evening with more troubling news. Richard, I found Sarah's lawyer, the one who handled the adoption. He's willing to testify that Sarah confessed the truth to him months before she died. She was planning to reverse the adoption and return Michael to you. Then we have proof of her intentions. Maybe, but there's a problem. The lawyer is also prepared to testify that Sarah claimed you were an unfit father who had abandoned Michael. She told him you'd given up custody voluntarily. Richard stared at Jake in disbelief. Why would she say that? To justify keeping him, maybe. Or perhaps she genuinely believed it. Remember, she was severely mentally ill. Tommy, who had been listening from the stairs, spoke up quietly. What if they're right? What if I belong in foster care? Never, Richard said fiercely. You belong here with me. I'll fight every legal battle necessary to prove it. But as he looked at his son's frightened face, Richard realized that winning in court might be the easy part. The real challenge would be helping Tommy heal from years of trauma while building a relationship with a father he couldn't remember. Dr. Patterson's therapy sessions had become a daily ritual, and slowly, fragments of Michael's buried memories began surfacing. Today's breakthrough came unexpectedly during a simple game of catch in the backyard. I know this, Tommy said suddenly, stopping mid-throw. The way you hold your hands, the way you throw, I've done this before. Richard's heart leaped. You remember playing catch? Not exactly, but my hands remember, if that makes sense, like they know what to do without my brain telling them. Dr. Patterson called it muscle memory, the body's ability to retain physical experiences even when the mind had blocked them. It's actually very encouraging, Tommy. It suggests your early memories are intact, just hidden. Over the following days, more fragments emerged. Tommy instinctively knew where things were in the house, the bathroom off the kitchen, the secret drawer in Richard's desk where he kept candy. He sang along to lullabies he claimed never to have heard before. Most surprisingly, he began gravitating toward objects that had belonged to Emma. Her jewelry box made him feel peaceful. Her perfume bottle, which Richard had never opened since her death, made Tommy smile for reasons he couldn't explain. Tell me more about her, Tommy requested one evening as they sat in Emma's former art studio. Richard picked up one of Emma's paintings, a mother holding a baby against a backdrop of golden sunlight. She painted this when you were born. She said you were her masterpiece, the most beautiful thing she'd ever created. Was she happy when I was born? Ecstatic. She'd been told she couldn't have children, so you were her miracle baby. She used to say you were worth fighting for. Tommy studied the painting intently. Sarah used to say, I was her miracle baby too. Maybe. Maybe she needed a miracle because she lost hers. Richard was struck by his son's insight and compassion. Despite everything Sarah had put them through, Tommy still defended her memory. You loved her very much? I did. But I think I loved Emma too, even though I don't remember her. Sometimes when I look at her pictures, I get this warm feeling inside, like coming home. That night, Richard found Tommy in Emma's studio, curled up in the corner where her easel stood, fast asleep. When he carried the boy to bed, Tommy mumbled something that stopped Richard cold. Sing the sunshine song, Daddy. Emma's lullaby, the one she sang every night before she died. Tommy was starting to remember not just Richard, but the mother who had loved him first. The next morning brought another revelation. Tommy woke up calling Richard Daddy instead of Mr. Richard for the first time. Did I say something wrong? Tommy asked, noticing Richard's emotional reaction. No, son. You said something perfectly right. But their newfound closeness was threatened by the ongoing legal battle. Richard's lawyers warned that the custody hearing was not going well. Sarah Miller's falsified adoption papers were ironclad, and the court was reluctant to remove a child from the system without extensive investigation. There's something else, Richard's attorney, Margaret Walsh, said during their morning meeting. CPS has concerns about your emotional stability. They're arguing that your grief over Michael's supposed death has made you desperate enough to believe any child could be your son. The DNA proves paternity, not your fitness as a parent. They're painting you as a wealthy man who's bought himself a replacement son. Tommy, overhearing from the hallway, felt his fragile sense of security crumbling again. What if the courts were right? What if Richard only loved him because he was a convenient substitute for the son he'd lost? As Tommy retreated to his room, he found himself caught between two impossible choices: fight for a father who might not truly want him, or accept a system that would treat him like a problem to be solved. The revelation came from the most unexpected source, a letter hidden in Sarah Miller's safety deposit box, discovered only when her estate was finally processed. Jake Morrison hand-delivered it to Richard with trembling fingers. Richard, you need to read this carefully. Everything we thought we knew about Sarah Miller is wrong. The letter was addressed to Michael Harrison and dated just 1 week before Sarah's death. My dearest Michael, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you have found your way back to your real father. I pray he can forgive what I've done, and I pray you can understand why I did it. I was not a random woman who stole you. I was your mother, Emma's closest friend, and your father's former colleague. I worked at St. Mary's Hospital when Emma was receiving her cancer treatment. I held her hand when she died, and I promised her I would watch over you always. When Emma passed, your father was destroyed by grief. He began drinking heavily, missing work, leaving you with nannies for days at a time. I was so worried about you that I reported Richard to social services, but nothing was done. Rich men are protected in ways poor mothers are not. The night I took you, Richard had been gone for 3 days. You were sick with fever, and the nanny had left you alone. I found you crying in your crib, burning up with temperature, and I couldn't walk away. I told myself I was saving you from neglect, but I know the truth now. I didn't save you. I saved myself. My baby boy died in my arms, and I couldn't survive that pain. Taking you wasn't about rescuing you. It was about rescuing me from a grief that was killing me. I gave you the love I would have given my son, and you became my reason for living. but you were never truly mine, and keeping you was the most selfish thing I've ever done. By the time I realized Richard had sobered up and was searching for you desperately, too much time had passed. I couldn't just return you without facing prison, and I couldn't bear the thought of you growing up knowing your mother was a criminal. But now I'm dying, and I can't leave you alone in this world. Your father is a good man who lost his way in grief, just like I did. He loves you more than life itself. I saw it in his eyes when he held you as a baby. The adoption papers were fake. I forged everything. You were never legally mine, Michael. You always belonged with your father. I'm bringing you home where you belong. Can you forgive a broken woman who loved you the only way she knew how? All my love, Sarah P.S. Tell your father that Emma's last words weren't just about keeping you safe. She made me promise that if anything ever happened to Richard, I would be your guardian. She trusted me with her most precious gift. I took that gift too soon. The room fell silent as Richard finished reading. Tommy, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward with tears streaming down his face. "She knew you?" Tommy whispered. "She knew my real mom?" Richard's hands shook as he processed this earth-shattering revelation. Sarah Miller hadn't been a random kidnapper. She'd been Emma's friend, acting out of misguided love and devastating grief. "Mr. Richard, Daddy, were you really drinking and leaving me alone?" Richard closed his eyes, shame washing over him. "Yes. After your mother died, I fell apart completely. I wasn't the father you deserved. But Sarah said you were looking for me desperately, because losing you sobered me up instantly. It made me realize what Emma would have thought of the man I'd become." Richard knelt before Tommy. "Sarah was right to worry about you. I was failing as your father." Jake Morrison spoke quietly from the corner. "Richard, this letter changes everything legally. It proves the adoption was fraudulent and that Sarah intended to return Michael. But more importantly, it proves Sarah Miller loved us both," Tommy finished. "She loved me enough to take care of me when my real dad couldn't, and she loved you enough to bring me home when she knew she was dying." Richard pulled Tommy into his arms, both of them crying for the complex woman who had stolen and saved them both. Sarah Miller wasn't the villain of their story. She was a broken guardian angel who had carried impossible burdens until she couldn't anymore. But as they held each other, Richard realized their greatest challenge still lay ahead. Learning to be father and son while honoring the memory of the woman who had kept them apart and brought them together. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, but the discovery of Sarah's letter had transformed everything. Margaret Walsh met with Richard and Tommy in her downtown office. The letter spread across her mahogany desk like evidence of a crime that was also an act of love. "This document exonerates you completely, Richard. It proves Sarah Miller committed fraud, that she intended to return Michael, and that her actions, while illegal, were motivated by genuine concern for the child's welfare." Margaret adjusted her glasses. "The court will almost certainly award you full custody." Tommy sat quietly in the leather chair beside Richard, his small frame nearly swallowed by the expensive furniture. "What happens to Sarah's memory? Will everyone just think she was a bad person?" "Tommy, the court isn't concerned with Sarah Miller's reputation. They're concerned with your well-being. But she wasn't bad, she was just broken." Richard squeezed his son's hand. "We know that, son, and that's what matters." Later that evening, Richard found Tommy in Emma's art studio again, staring at the painting of mother and child. But this time he wasn't alone. He'd brought one of the few photos he had of Sarah Miller and placed it beside Emma's painting. "I think they would have been friends," Tommy said without looking up. "My two moms, they both loved me, just in different ways." "I think you're right. Daddy, can I ask you something hard?" "Anything. Do you hate Sarah for what she did?" Richard considered the question carefully. A month ago, the answer would have been yes. But now, after reading her letter, after understanding her motivations, I hate that she took you from me. I hate that we lost 6 years together. But Sarah herself? No, I don't hate her. She was drowning in grief, just like I was. I'm glad you don't hate her, because I still love her, even though I know what she did was wrong. Love isn't something you can just turn off, Tommy, and the love Sarah gave you was real, even if the circumstances were wrong. Tommy was quiet for a moment, then surprised Richard with his next question. Do you think Emma would have forgiven her? Richard thought about his wife's compassionate nature, her work with troubled mothers at the hospital, her endless capacity for understanding. Yes, I think Emma would have forgiven her a long time ago. Then I forgive her too, and I forgive you for being sad when I was little. Richard's eyes filled with tears. Tommy, you don't need to forgive me. I should have been stronger. Everyone gets sad sometimes, even daddies. Sarah taught me that sometimes people do the wrong things for the right reasons. The next morning brought unexpected news. Jake Morrison called with information that would complicate their newfound peace. Richard, I've been investigating Sarah's background more thoroughly, and I found something significant. Sarah Miller had a sister, Rebecca Miller Hoffman. She's been looking for Tommy since Sarah died. A sister? Tommy never mentioned any family. That's because Sarah cut off all contact with her family when she took Tommy. But Rebecca has been fighting CPS to get custody. She claims Sarah confided in her about Tommy's true identity years ago, and that she's been trying to build a case to return him to you. Richard felt the ground shifting beneath his feet again. What does this mean? It means there's another person who loves Tommy and has a legal claim to guardianship. Rebecca Miller Hoffman is married, financially stable, and she's Tommy's legal aunt through the adoption. The court might see her as a more stable option than a single father with a history of depression. Richard's worst nightmare was materializing. Another custody battle, another threat to lose his son just when they'd found each other. Daddy? Tommy appeared in the doorway, having overheard. Who's Rebecca? She's Sarah's sister, your aunt. Tommy's face went white. Is she going to take me away from you? I won't let that happen, son. I promise. But as Richard held his trembling child, he wondered if he was making a promise he couldn't keep. Just when forgiveness had begun to heal their wounds, a new battle was beginning, one that would test everything they'd built together. The meeting with Rebecca Miller Hoffman took place on a sunny Thursday morning in Margaret Walsh's conference room. Richard had prepared for battle, but the woman who walked through the door was nothing like he'd expected. She was in her early 40s, with Sarah's gentle eyes and blonde hair, but where Sarah had been brittle from grief, Rebecca radiated quiet strength. "Mr. Harrison," she said, extending her hand, "thank you for agreeing to meet." Tommy sat close to Richard, his small hand gripping his father's tightly. "Are you really Sarah's sister?" Rebecca's face softened immediately. "I am, sweetheart, and you look exactly like she said you would, brave and beautiful and too smart for your own good." "She talked about me?" "Every single day for 6 years. She called me every week, usually crying, telling me how much she loved you and how terrified she was that someone would take you away." Rebecca's voice caught. "She never told me your real name or where you came from, but she did say that loving you was both the best and worst thing she'd ever done." Richard studied Rebecca's face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agenda. "What exactly do you want, Mrs. Hoffman?" "I want to tell you the truth about my sister, and I want to do what's best for Tommy." Rebecca opened a worn photo album. "Sarah wasn't the same person after her baby died. She was in and out of psychiatric facilities for months. When she disappeared with you, Tommy, our family assumed she'd had another breakdown." "But you didn't report her?" "We tried to find her, but Sarah was clever about staying hidden. And honestly, when we finally tracked her down 2 years later, she seemed healthy, happy. Taking care of you had given her a purpose that all the therapy in the world couldn't provide. Tommy leaned forward. You knew about me for 4 years? I knew my sister had found a child she loved desperately. I didn't know she'd taken someone else's son. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. When she called me the week before she died, she finally told me everything. She was terrified about what would happen to you, but she was also relieved that she could finally stop running. Richard felt his defenses cracking. What did she tell you exactly? That your father was a good man who'd lost his way in grief, but that he'd never stopped looking for you. That your real mother was an artist who painted beautiful pictures and sang lullabies that made you smile. And that she'd stolen the most precious thing in the world because she couldn't face her own pain. Rebecca turned to a page in the photo album, a picture of Sarah and Tommy baking cookies together, both of them covered in flour and laughing. She also told me that if anything happened to her, I should help you find your way back to your real father, not fight to keep you. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Margaret Walsh spoke first. Mrs. Hoffman, are you saying you're withdrawing your custody petition? I'm saying I never intended to separate Tommy from his father. I filed the petition to prevent him from disappearing into the foster system while Mr. Harrison fought the legal battles. I wanted to make sure he was safe and loved while the adults figured things out. Tommy looked between Rebecca and Richard with wide eyes. You want me to stay with my daddy? Sweetheart, I want you to be happy. And from everything I can see, you are happy here. Rebecca smiled through her tears. But I do have one request. Richard tensed. What kind of request? I'd like to be part of Tommy's life if you'll let me. Not as a replacement mother or a threat to your family, but as someone who loves him and can tell him stories about the woman who raised him. Sarah made mistakes, but she loved this boy with everything she had. Tommy surprised everyone by slipping out of his chair and approaching Rebecca. Will you tell me about the first time Sarah saw me? Oh, sweetheart, she said you were the most beautiful baby she'd ever seen, with bright blue eyes that seemed to look right into her soul. She said she knew instantly that you were meant to be loved, even though she was stealing me. Rebecca's honesty was gentle but unflinching. She was very sick, Tommy. Grief had broken something inside her brain that made her believe she was saving you instead of taking you. But the love she felt for you was completely real. 3 hours later, the custody hearing that had threatened to tear their family apart lasted exactly 15 minutes. With Rebecca's testimony supporting Richard's fitness as a father and her formal withdrawal of her petition, the judge awarded Richard full legal custody of Michael Harrison. But the real resolution came that evening as Richard, Tommy and Rebecca sat in Emma's art studio, looking through photo albums from both sides of Tommy's complicated life. I want to remember it all, Tommy announced, being Michael with you and Mama Emma and being Tommy with Sarah. All of it was real, and all of it was love. Richard found himself asking Rebecca, would you like to stay for dinner? Mrs. Chen makes excellent pot roast, and I think Tommy would like to hear more stories. I'd love that. Abdul. As they walked to the dining room together, Tommy tugging Rebecca's hand to show her Emma's paintings, Richard realized something profound had happened. They'd created something that had never existed before. A family built not on biology or law, but on the radical choice to love a child completely, regardless of how complicated his story had become. Later that night, as Richard tucked Tommy into bed, his son looked up with those wise blue eyes and said, Daddy, I think I understand now why this all happened. Why's that, son? Maybe Emma and Sarah and you all needed to love me in different ways so I could learn that families don't have to be perfect to be real. And maybe Sarah needed to love me so she could find a way to forgive herself for losing her baby. Richard kissed his son's forehead, marveling at the wisdom of a 7-year-old who had lived through more heartbreak and healing than most adults ever would. You know what I think, Tommy? What? I think you're exactly the son your mother Emma dreamed you'd become, and exactly the boy Sarah hoped you'd grow up to be, and exactly the miracle I prayed for every single day. Tommy smiled sleepily. And you're exactly the daddy worth coming home to. Ought it? As Richard turned off the lights, he whispered a prayer of gratitude to both women who had loved his son, Emma, who had given Michael life, and Sarah, who had given Tommy the strength to survive until he could find his way home. Outside, the rain that had brought them together continued to fall gently on the garden, where tomorrow Richard and Tommy would plant flowers in memory of all the mothers who had shaped their extraordinary journey home.